Ezra has only $4.12 in his pocket. At the Blue Star store at 11:30 p.m., he sees a 324 one-pound giant sleeping by the magazines. That man is Shaq. He scored over 28,000 points in his career. Now, he wears messy clothes to test people's hearts. The manager wants to call the police because he thinks the giant is a crazy person. Shaq accepts the insults to find real kindness in a broken country. He faces mean rules and hate, while Ezra is very hungry. The giant drops a stack of $5,000 in cash while sleeping. What will Ezra do? The cold hit Ezra first. It always did. He stepped out of Miller & Son's tire shop at 11:15 p.m. His third shift of the day was finally over. His hands were raw. Black grease sat under every fingernail. No amount of soap could wash it out anymore. Ezra Whitfield was 19 years old. He looked older. Tired eyes do that to a face. He had worked 3 jobs that day. Morning shift stocking shelves at a grocery store. Afternoon shift washing dishes at a diner near the highway. Then the night shift at the tire shop, lifting tires that weighed almost as much as he did. His back ached. His legs felt like wet sand. He had not sat down once since 6 in the morning. Most nights, he told himself it was temporary, just until things got better. He had been telling himself that for almost a year now. At the diner, the cook always slipped him a free roll near closing time, never saying a word about it. Small kindness like that kept him going some days. It reminded him the world was not entirely cruel, even when it felt that way. The tire shop was the worst of the 3 jobs. Heavy lifting, sharp metal edges, and a boss who barely remembered his name. But it paid the most per hour, so Ezra never complained. He counted the money in his palm one more time. $4.12. That was all he had left. He had already paid $1,150 for rent on a damp basement apartment 2 blocks away. The water on the walls never fully dried. The landlord did not care. His stomach growled. He ignored it. He had skipped lunch to save money for cough syrup. His little sister, Daisy, had been coughing for 6 days straight. He pulled his jacket tighter and started walking toward home. The wind in Newark in December does not feel like wind. It feels like a slap that never stops. Streetlights flickered overhead, half of them burned out and never replaced. Trash cans stood frozen at odd angles along the curb. A stray cat darted across his path, disappearing into a dark alley. Ezra barely noticed any of it. His mind was already at home, thinking about Daisy's cough and whether she had eaten dinner. His shoes had a hole near the left toe. Cold air slipped in with every step. He did not complain. Complaining never fixed anything. His father used to say that, before he passed 2 years ago. His father had been a tow truck driver. Poor but proud. He never asked anyone for a handout, not once in his whole life. Ezra still remembered his father's hands. Big, rough hands, covered in old scars from years of fixing broken cars on the side of the road. Even when work was slow, his father never complained. He just got up the next morning and tried again. We may not have much, his father used to say, but we have our name. Don't ever trade that for anything. Ezra carried that same pride like a heavy coat. It kept him warm in a different way. Since his father passed, Ezra had become the man of the house. He took care of his little sister, Daisy, who was only 11. Their mother worked 2 states away, sending what little money she could each month. It was never quite enough. Ezra checked his bank account in his head as he walked. $17.42 before he paid the rent 2 days ago. Now it was almost nothing. He still owed the pharmacy $4,200 from his father's last hospital bill, a debt that grew a little every single month. He pushed the thought away. Thinking about debt at midnight never helped anyone sleep. Sometimes he wondered what it would feel like to stop worrying, even for one single day. He could not remember the last time his mind had felt truly quiet. Halfway home, his stomach cramped hard. He stopped walking. He looked across the street. A small store glowed under a flickering sign. Blue Star Convenience. Warm light. No wind inside. Just for 2 minutes, he told himself. Just to warm up. He pushed open the glass door. A bell rang above his head. The store was almost empty. Old shelves. A buzzing freezer in the back. Country music playing low from a cheap radio. The floor tiles were cracked near the entrance, patched with gray tape that had peeled at the edges. A faded sign promised fresh coffee for 99 cents, though the coffee machine looked like it had not worked in months. Then Ezra stopped walking. In the corner, near the magazine rack, sat the biggest man he had ever seen in his life. The man was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. His knees were pulled up because there was nowhere else to put his legs. His shoes were enormous, scuffed at the toes, the kind of shoes you do not forget once you see them. He looked massive enough to block the whole aisle by himself. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered, casting a pale glow over his huge frame. Ezra had never seen shoulders that wide on a real person before. Only on television, during basketball games he sometimes watched at the diner. His clothes were old and stained. A gray hoodie with a tear near the shoulder. Sweatpants that did not match. He looked exactly like a man with nowhere else to go. He was snoring softly, his chin resting on his chest. Ezra had never seen a person that big in real life. Not even close. Then he saw something else. Something that made his breath catch in his throat. A thick stack of cash was sticking halfway out of the man's jacket pocket. Crisp $100 bills. New ones. The kind that still smell like ink. Ezra guessed it was close to $5,000. Maybe more. His heart started pounding. He thought about his rent. He thought about Daisy's cough. He thought about the hole in his shoe and the empty fridge waiting for him at home. He thought about the pharmacy bill, growing bigger every single month like a weed nobody could pull out. $5,000 could fix almost everything. All of it. In one single night. For one long second, his whole world seemed to tilt sideways. He took one step closer. Then another. The big man did not move. His breathing stayed slow and even, like a man in a deep, heavy sleep. Ezra's hand drifted toward the pocket. His fingers trembled in the cold store air. Then he stopped. What if the man woke up? What if those huge hands grabbed his wrist before he could even run? A man that size could break a person in half without even trying hard. Fear crawled up Ezra's spine. But it was not only fear that stopped him. It was his father's voice, somewhere deep in his memory. We may be poor, son. We are never thieves. Never. Ezra pulled his hand back. He stood there, frozen, fighting himself in the middle of a quiet store at midnight. That is when the big man mumbled something in his sleep. His voice was low and broken, almost like a child's voice trapped inside a giant's body. Mama, I'm hungry. The words hit Ezra like a fist to the chest. He looked at the man's face again, really looked this time. Up close, the man did not look dangerous. He looked exhausted, worn down, lonely in a way that had nothing to do with money. Whatever this man's story was, right now he looked just as broken as Ezra felt. Ezra stepped back from the pocket completely. He would not take a single dollar. Not tonight. Not ever. Instead, he walked toward the small food shelf at the back of the store. He had $4.12. He needed every penny for Daisy's medicine tomorrow, but something pulled at him anyway. He picked up a simple ham sandwich, wrapped in plastic. $2.50. Then a small bottle of water. $1.20. That left him with 42 cents. He stood there a moment, holding both items, his stomach twisting with hunger. He had not eaten anything since breakfast, but he did not let himself second-guess the decision. He carried them to the counter, without 1 second of regret. The cashier barely looked up from her phone as she rang him up. She slid the items across the counter, without a single word, her thumb still scrolling. Ezra walked back toward the sleeping giant. He knelt down slowly, careful not to make a sound. He set the sandwich and the water gently beside the man's massive hand. He did not know why he did it. He just knew it felt right. That is when a sharp voice cut through the quiet store. Hey, what do you think you're doing back there? Ezra spun around. A man in a tan store vest was marching toward them, scowling. His name tag read Gary in bold letters. His hair was slicked back too perfectly for someone working a midnight shift. Gary had worked at Blue Star for almost 3 years. He liked rules. He liked them even more when he got to enforce them on people smaller than him. That's a vagrant, Gary snapped, pointing a finger like a weapon. I should have called the cops the second he sat his fat self down on my floor. Ezra felt anger rise in his throat, but he kept his voice calm. He's not bothering anyone, sir. He's just sleeping. Sleeping where customers walk, Gary shot back. This store has standards. We are not some shelter for every drifter who wanders in off the street. Ezra glanced down at the sleeping man, then back at Gary. He hasn't said one word to anybody. He hasn't broken a single thing. Not yet, Gary muttered. Gary's eyes narrowed. He reached behind the counter and pulled out a black stun baton, gripping it like it gave him courage he did not actually have. This is a business, not a homeless shelter, Gary said. Standards matter here. We don't let trash sit in our aisles. He stepped toward the sleeping giant, raising the baton slightly. Ezra's whole body moved, before his brain caught up. He stepped directly between Gary and the sleeping man, blocking his path completely. Don't, Ezra said. His voice shook, but he held his ground. Gary's face twisted with disbelief. Move, kid. This isn't your problem. He's not hurting anybody, Ezra repeated, louder this time. Leave him be. Gary shoved a finger into Ezra's chest. You want to lose your welcome here too? Keep talking. Ezra did not move an inch. His feet felt planted to the floor, like roots had grown overnight. You don't even know him, Gary hissed. He could be dangerous. He could be on something. And you don't know him either, Ezra answered. That doesn't give you the right to hurt a sleeping man. Gary's jaw tightened. For a second, it looked like he might swing the baton anyway. Then he seemed to think better of it. While Gary ranted, spit flying with every angry word, Ezra quietly reached down. Without looking, his fingers found the edge of the stack of cash poking from the giant's pocket. He gently tucked it deeper inside, hiding it from Gary's view. He did not want that money getting the sleeping man into more trouble than he was already in. Gary finally huffed and stormed back toward the front counter, muttering about filing a complaint with corporate. Ezra exhaled slowly. His heart was still hammering. Just then, the bell above the door jingled again. 2 young men walked in, hoods pulled low over their faces. One was tall and lean, the other stocky, with a crooked grin. Their names, Ezra would later learn, were Brock and Jace. They walked slow, scanning the store like they owned it. Their boots left wet prints across the cracked tile floor. They were not like Gary. Gary was annoying. These two felt dangerous. Brock's eyes swept the store, landing on the sleeping giant in the corner. Then they landed on Ezra, still kneeling close beside him. A glint of cash had caught Brock's eye, just barely visible near the giant's jacket. He nudged Jace with his elbow and nodded toward the corner. Ezra felt his stomach drop. He had seen guys like Brock and Jace before, hanging around the gas station near his old school. They moved slow and careless, like nothing in the world could ever touch them. That kind of careless was always dangerous. He stood up slowly, placing himself once again between danger and the sleeping man. An older woman pushing a mop bucket appeared from aisle 4. Her name tag read Martha. She had kind, tired eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had seen Brock and Jace's type before. Too many times working night shifts in this neighborhood. Without a word, she walked over and pressed the wooden handle of her mop into Ezra's hand. Her eyes said everything her mouth did not. Be careful, son. Martha had worked the night shift at Blue Star for almost 6 years. She had seen plenty of trouble walk through those doors. She knew when to call for help and when there was no time left to wait. Years of watching the night shift had taught her to read trouble before it started. Tonight, she trusted her instincts completely. She backed toward the front counter, pulling out her phone to dial for the police, just in case things turned bad fast. Ezra gripped the handle tight, his knuckles turning white. Brock and Jace moved closer, splitting up to surround him near the canned goods aisle. Gary, watching from the front counter, suddenly found something very interesting to do with the receipt paper. He flicked off the light switch near the back corner, pretending it was an accident. The aisle went dim, shadows stretching long across the floor. Just step aside, little man, Brock said, his voice low and smooth like oil. We just want to check on your big friend there. He's not bothering you, Ezra said, his voice steady despite the fear pounding in his chest. Leave him alone. Jace laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You hear this kid? Thinks he's a bodyguard. Somebody has to be, Ezra said. Brock shoved Ezra hard, sending him crashing into a shelf of canned soup. Cans clattered and rolled across the floor, 24 of them in total, rolling in every direction like marbles. Pain shot through Ezra's shoulder, but he scrambled back up immediately. He threw both arms around the giant's leg, refusing to let go, refusing to let them get any closer. "Get off him!" Jace shouted, his patience snapping. A blade flicked open in Jace's hand, the small knife catching what little light remained in the dim aisle. He slashed quickly, catching Ezra's forearm. A thin line of red bloomed instantly through his jacket sleeve. Pain seared through Ezra's arm, but he bit down hard and stayed silent. He would not scream. He would not risk waking the sleeping man into a chaos that could get him hurt too. Tears stung Ezra's eyes, more from fear than pain. He leaned close to the giant's ear, whispering as softly as he could manage. "Run," he breathed. "Please, just run." His arm throbbed with every heartbeat. Blood dripped slowly onto the cold tile floor. He did not look down at it. He kept his eyes locked on Brock and Jace, refusing to show how scared he truly felt. Jace raised the knife again, his hand shaking slightly now. Maybe he had not expected the boy to be this stubborn. What Ezra did not know was that the giant had not been fully asleep for several minutes now. He had felt every shove, heard every cruel word, watched through barely cracked eyelids as a starving teenager bled to protect a complete stranger. Something inside the giant's chest cracked wide open. Slowly, the giant rose to his feet. He did not shout. He did not roar. He simply stood, unfolding to his full towering height, and the entire aisle seemed to shrink around him. His shadow swallowed Brock and Jace whole. Brock's cocky grin vanished instantly. Jace's knife hand froze midair, trembling. The giant reached out one enormous hand and gently closed his fingers around the blade. With barely any effort, he snapped it in half, the metal crumbling like a stale cracker. The sound echoed through the silent store. For a moment, nobody moved. Brock and Jace stared up at the giant like two kids caught somewhere they were never supposed to be. "Leave," the giant said. Just one word. Quiet. Calm. Final. Brock and Jace did not need to be told twice. They bolted for the door, nearly tripping over each other in their rush to escape. Gary, watching from the counter, felt his stomach turn to ice. Something about the giant's face suddenly looked familiar. He stared harder, recognition dawning in slow, horrified waves. That jawline. Those shoulders. He had seen that exact face on a magazine cover in his manager's office just last week. A business magazine. A list of the wealthiest former athletes in America. His hands started shaking. He thought about the stun baton he had nearly used. He thought about every cruel word he had just shouted at a man worth more money than his entire store chain combined. Gary's knees nearly buckled beneath him. The giant ignored Gary completely. He knelt down beside Ezra, his enormous frame somehow gentle, as he checked the cut on the boy's arm. His huge fingers moved carefully, almost shy about their own size, as he pressed a clean cloth against the wound. "You shouldn't have stepped in front of that knife," he said quietly. "But I'm glad you did." He meant every word, and his voice carried a weight Ezra had never heard from anyone before. Ezra managed a weak smile through the pain. Couldn't just stand there. That is when he noticed it. The sandwich. The water bottle. Untouched, sitting exactly where Ezra had placed them earlier. His throat tightened. This starving boy, with only pocket change to his name, had chosen to buy food for a stranger instead of eating it himself. The giant pulled Ezra into a careful, protective hug, mindful of the wound on his arm. For the first time, that night, neither of them said a single word. None were needed. But the night was not over yet. Gary, shaking with fear and humiliation, panicked. He could not let anyone know he had nearly attacked a billionaire with a stun baton. So he did something desperate and cruel. He pressed the silent alarm button under the counter, then dialed the police himself. When the officers arrived 8 minutes later, Gary pointed straight at Ezra, his voice high and frantic. "That boy was trying to rob this man," Gary lied. "I saw the whole thing. They probably planned it together." Ezra's heart sank straight to his stomach. "That's not true," he said, but his voice cracked with disbelief. The officers, following procedure, placed handcuffs on Ezra's wrists. The cold metal bit into his skin, colder somehow than the December air outside. The giant said nothing as they led Ezra toward the patrol car. He simply followed close behind, calm and silent, his jaw set tight. He wanted to see, with his own eyes, how the system treated a poor, honest kid accused of a crime he never committed. At the police station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was 3:45 in the morning. Ezra sat alone in a cold metal chair, his wrists raw from the handcuffs, his arm throbbing beneath a hastily applied bandage. He stared at the floor, exhaustion and fear pressing down on him like a heavy stone. An officer had asked him questions twice already, the same questions, written down on the same clipboard. Ezra answered honestly each time. Nobody seemed to believe him. He thought about Daisy, alone in the apartment, probably still asleep, not knowing her brother sat handcuffed in a police station. He hoped, more than anything, that she had not woken up scared in an empty room. Then the door swung open. A woman in an expensive gray suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind her walked two more officers, their posture suddenly stiff and respectful. "This young man," the woman announced, her voice sharp and clear, "is not under arrest. He is a witness and a victim of assault." The desk sergeant blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, who exactly are you?" The woman set her briefcase down with a firm click. "I represent Dr. Shaquille O'Neal." The entire room went silent. The giant stepped forward into the harsh station lights. For the first time that night, he stood up straight, his full identity no longer hidden behind tired eyes and ragged clothes. Every officer in the room recognized him instantly. Jaws dropped. One younger officer actually dropped his coffee cup, the liquid spreading across the tile floor unnoticed. Even the desk sergeant, a man who had seen plenty in his career, found himself momentarily speechless. "I've been documenting how this city treats people who have nothing," Shaq said, his deep voice calm but firm. "Tonight, I found someone with everything that matters. Real character." The desk sergeant cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we had no idea." The manager filed a report claiming a robbery had taken place. "The only thing that boy stole," Shaq said, "was a sandwich he bought, with his own $4, to give to a stranger he thought was hungry." The room stayed silent. Even the officers, who had cuffed Ezra, now looked down at the floor, embarrassed. Within 30 seconds, his lawyer had pulled up every piece of paperwork related to Ezra's family. The unpaid medical bills, the overdue rent notice, the crushing debt that had been suffocating the Whitfield family for years. She worked quickly, her fingers tapping across a tablet screen, cross-referencing every document she could find. "Clear it," Shaq said simply. "All of it." His lawyer nodded and began making calls immediately, her fingers flying across her phone screen. Gary, who had followed the police to the station hoping to look like a hero, suddenly found himself in handcuffs instead. Charges of filing a false police report. Charges related to violating multiple labor and safety codes at the store. He tried to explain, his voice climbing higher, with every word, but nobody in the room cared to listen anymore. "This is a misunderstanding," Gary insisted. "I was protecting my store." "You were protecting your pride," Shaq said quietly, not even looking at him. He was led away, sputtering useless excuses that nobody bothered to listen to anymore. Ezra sat frozen in his chair, staring up at the towering man, who had been sleeping on a dirty store floor just hours earlier. "You're really him," Ezra whispered. "You're Shaq." "I am," Shaq said simply. "Why were you sleeping on the floor of a gas station store?" Ezra asked, still trying to make sense of the night. "You could be anywhere in the world." Shaq knelt down to Ezra's eye level, his enormous frame folding, with surprising gentleness. "I'm just a man who remembers being hungry once," he said quietly. "Just like you." Outside, the sun had not yet risen. The sky was still a deep, bruised blue. Shaq's driver pulled up in a black SUV, the windows tinted dark against the early morning light. He helped Ezra into the back seat himself, careful of the bandaged arm. They drove through quiet Newark streets, past the same tire shop, where Ezra had worked just hours earlier. They passed the same cold corners he had walked 1,000 times before. Ezra stared out the window, watching the city blur past in the dim morning light. None of it felt real yet. His arm still ached under the bandage, but his mind felt strangely calm for the first time in months. "You should rest that arm," Shaq said quietly from the seat beside him. "A doctor will check it properly later today." Ezra nodded. He had so many questions, but exhaustion had finally caught up with him. The city lights blurred past the window, gold and gray smearing together as the SUV rolled on. When they arrived at Ezra's apartment, Daisy was already awake, peeking through the curtains, worried sick about her missing brother. Shaq stepped out of the SUV, ducking low to avoid hitting his head on the doorframe. Daisy froze in the doorway, staring up at the enormous man standing on her front steps. She looked from Shaq to her brother, confusion and relief mixing on her tired face. "Ezra, are you okay?" she asked, rushing forward to hug him gently around the waist, careful of his bandaged arm. He spoke briefly to Daisy, his voice gentle despite his massive size. He told her about a full scholarship, fully funded all the way, until she turned 18. Tuition, books, everything she would ever need. Daisy's eyes went wide. "For me? Really?" "For someone whose brother gave away his last sandwich," Shaq said, kneeling down to her height. "You come from good people." Daisy burst into tears, hugging Ezra tightly around the waist. Ezra could not find any words. He simply nodded, his own eyes filling with tears he had been holding back all night. Before Shaq climbed back into the SUV, Ezra grabbed his sleeve. "Why?" Ezra asked. "Why did you do all this for us?" Shaq paused, looking down at the worn-out sandwich wrapper still tucked in his jacket pocket. "Because you gave me your last $4, he said quietly, "when you had every reason not to." He climbed into the SUV and disappeared into the gray morning light. Hours later, inside a quiet hotel room at the Grand Mariposa, Shaq sat alone by the window. The first rays of sunrise spilled across the carpet. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the heater. Somewhere far below, a garbage truck rumbled down an empty street. He thought about how the night had started. Just another test, like the ones he had run quietly for the past 2 years. He had been sleeping rough in stores and bus stations across the country, watching how strangers treated a man who looked like he had nothing. Most nights ended the same way. People walked past. People stared. A few even laughed. Tonight had been different from the very first moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Ezra had slipped it there during the chaos at the store, tucked carefully where only Shaq would eventually find it. His large hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, clearly written in a rush. "I only have $4, but you need this sandwich more than me. Don't give up, mister." Shaq read the note 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. A single tear slid down his cheek, followed quickly by another. He had built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had won championships in front of screaming crowds. He had shaken hands with presidents and movie stars. He remembered the roar of arenas, the flash of cameras, the sound of his own name chanted by thousands of strangers. All of it had felt important once. Some of it still did. Yet none of those memories carried the same quiet power as a torn sandwich wrapper and a few crumpled dollars. But nothing in his entire life had ever moved him like this. For dollars and a sandwich from a starving boy who had nothing left to give. He thought about his own mother, Lucille, and the nights in Newark when there had been no food at all. He thought about being a hungry child himself, dreaming of a world where someone, anyone, would notice. Back then, nobody had noticed him. He had promised himself, long ago, that one day he would notice somebody else. Lucille used to tell him that real strength was quiet. Loud men needed everyone to see them. Strong men just helped, and let the helping speak for itself. He remembered her standing in their small kitchen in Newark, stretching one chicken into meals for an entire week. She never complained about what they lacked. She only taught him to notice what others lacked too. He had spent years chasing championships, trophies, and headlines. None of those moments, not one single one, felt like the weight of this small crumpled note in his hand. Tonight, in a small, broken convenience store, that world had finally shown up. Not through wealth, not through fame, through a torn sandwich wrapper and a boy's quiet, stubborn kindness. Outside the hotel window, Newark slowly woke up. Garbage trucks rumbled down empty streets. Lights flickered on in tired apartment windows, one by one. Somewhere in that city, a tired tire shop worker named Ezra Whitfield was finally for the first time in years, sleeping without fear of tomorrow. His sister Daisy would wake up later, that morning, to a kitchen full of groceries, delivered quietly before sunrise. She would not know who sent them. She would simply be grateful that, for once, the fridge was not empty. Shaq folded the note carefully and placed it inside his wallet, right next to a faded photograph of his mother. He would carry it with him for the rest of his life. A reminder, written in messy, hurried handwriting, of what real wealth actually looks like. It is not the size of a man's bank account. It is not fame, trophies, or magazine covers. Sometimes, it is simply the size of a boy's heart, even when his pockets are almost completely empty. Weeks later, Ezra started a new job, one with steady hours and fair pay. Daisy's cough cleared up after proper medicine and rest. The basement apartment stayed a little warmer. That winter, the walls finally patched and dry. He still woke up early out of habit, the way 3 jobs had trained his body to do. But now mornings felt different. He made breakfast for Daisy before school. He read the newspaper with an actual cup of coffee instead of skipping the meal entirely. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about that giant sleeping by the magazines. He wondered if Shaq still tested strangers in quiet stores across the country, looking for people willing to give when they had almost nothing themselves. None of it had come from charity handed out like pity. It had come from dignity, recognized and repaid in full. That distinction mattered more than the dollar amount ever could. Ezra never told anyone the full story of that night. He did not need to. Some nights are not meant for bragging. They are meant for remembering quietly, in the dark, when the world feels unfair again. Daisy grew taller that year, healthier too, her cough nothing but a distant memory. She kept a single photograph on her dresser, taken outside their apartment, that strange winter morning. A reminder of the night everything changed. Ezra kept working hard, the way his father had taught him. He never expected handouts. He never asked for special treatment because of what happened. He simply lived his life with the same quiet pride that had gotten him through every hard night before. That pride was the one thing nobody could ever take away from him, no matter how hard life pushed back. Somewhere out there, right now, someone else is just like Ezra, tired, hungry, holding on to their last few dollars. The question is not whether kindness like that exists in this world. The real question is whether the rest of us are brave enough to notice it when we see it, and braver still, to be like Ezra, even when we have almost nothing left to give. Would you have done the same thing with only $4 in your pocket?